Painkiller Ghosts, Chapter 34, Lincoln Parks, Part 2 of 2. It's later that night, a handful of hours later, and this is how it is. Hey, have you heard from Aaron recently? He shakes his beard no, says, "Why is that?" "Well, I went by the store today to have Aaron ring me up, She smiles and winks towards him. "Wouldn't have to spend Link's money he gave me." Give the change back to Link. That's not the point. But no, I haven't seen Aaron. I haven't seen Aaron. They haven't either. Maybe Link and I will drive to her place tomorrow in the truck. We'll check it out. Are you gonna be up for dinner later time? I'll be watching the news. You can smoke some with me if you want. No, thanks. I need some sleep. We missed some of the route today. We'll have to make it up tomorrow. Time turns and walks off. Chastity picks up the remote control and turns on the television. She starts with the weather channel, then she changes to the home shopping channel, and then she flips to a real estate channel. Listing after listing of houses. But she already owns a house, and it seems all the houses around her are still for sale. Then a blank channel, and she keeps it there for a minute. The blue light, the white noise, the occasional hiss. She lights up a joint and she sits on the sofa, hits the joint a few times, and stares to where the wall meets the ceiling. It's blue from the television screen. She smokes some more, and there's a blue haze. And it's not a white noise anymore, it's a hazy blue hiss. Up in the library, Time stares out the window for a few minutes. He waits until a car passes. He stares out the window, fogging up the windows with his breath. He gets too close to the fog on the window and his beard leaves random patterns on the damp glass. He's waiting for the headlights to pass, then taillights. This is a game. Wait until the first car passes, then go to bed. And then headlights pass, quietly. He watches, he rubs his eyes, he walks over to the bookshelf and he picks up a sleeping pill and he swallows it with no water. Then he goes to his sleeping bag and he lies down on his back in his clothes and he closes his eyes and he falls asleep. Every so often in his dreams, in all of his dreams these days, no matter where, no matter what is going on, is Link's slap. It's always in his dreams. And down the street a little while later, the sound of a car door slamming sounds like that slap in Time's pill-induced dreams. He's dreaming about Chastity in her t-shirt and socks and nothing else. And he dreams she's on the beach by herself and takes off her socks. And then she takes off her shirt. She's walking up the beach naked, but Time, in his dream, is far behind her. And he can't really see her naked until she turns and starts to walk towards him. And then, all of a sudden in his dream, he has his camera with him. And he tries to take a picture of her, but it jams. And then the dream ends. And then the dream starts over again. And down the street, the sound of the car door slamming sounds like nothing to Chastity, spaced out in her hazy blue noise. She's dreaming she's walking around at the beach in a t-shirt and shorts, walking up and down the beach, holding the hand of a little girl who's smiling and laughing. And Chastity keeps looking into the surf for a body. She keeps looking at the breakers to see her mother floating away, but she never sees one. And she smiles as she walks on the sand. This is 10 minutes later, and this is how it is. The car door slams, slap, and Stan gets out of the car. He looks around and heads to the empty house across the street from Chastity's. He walks around to the back of the house. He walks like he's supposed to be there, like he lives there. But there is no one watching anyway. He walks in the shadows, does nothing for about 10 minutes, and then he goes to the side of the house, beneath the bush in the dark, and he watches the other house, Chastity's house, and he sees the blue light downstairs, and he sees this dark everywhere else, and he watches, and he watches, and he sees no sign of life, no movement, and he stands still behind the bush for 10 minutes. He takes gloves from his pocket and puts them on. Then he walks down the driveway, pausing at the sidewalk, glancing around, acting casually, and walks across the street and right up Chastity's driveway, past her car, and turns right onto the sidewalk and walks up to her front door. Stan stands at the front door for a minute, then two. He puts his ear to the door. He smells the air. He puts his hand on the door handle and he holds it there for a minute, then two. Then he turns his wrist and the knob moves. It's unlocked. Chastity forgot to lock it. She didn't think she'd be stoned out on the sofa that early, and time had assumed that Chastity would lock the doors, but it's unlocked. Stan turns the knob and holds the door closed, and he holds the handle unhinged for a minute, then two. Then he opens the door a little, 3 inches, then 4, and he holds it and he listens, but he hears nothing, and he sees nothing but the hazy blue. And then he opens it 2 inches more, then 3 more, and then pauses, and then after a minute, then 2. He opens it so he can slip his whole body in, and he enters into the house, into Chastity's house. He enters into the hazy blue house. He stands in the hall for a minute, 2. He smells pot. He sees the hazy blue. He feels at peace for a minute. He takes his gloves off. And then he walks into Chastity's living room where she's asleep on the sofa, and he stares at her for a minute, then 2. Then he looks down and sees where she laid the joint she was smoking, and he picks it up. The joint is out and he puts it in his pocket, and he stares at her for a minute, then 2. He takes a step forward and he bends over towards her navel, towards where the t-shirt stopped, and he breathes deeply through his nose, and he can smell her. He stops, looks at her eyes, her closed eyes, then at her breasts, and he walks out of the living room and into the hallway. He can still smell her. He listens. All quiet. He walks into the kitchen. He opens and closes 2 drawers, and he finally finds a rolling pin, and he pulls it out, stares at it a minute, then 2. He walks back into the hallway and goes up the staircase. He looks into the first bedroom, and it's empty. Then he opens the next door, and at first all he sees are a lot of books everywhere. And then he looks onto the floor and he sees Time, bearded and seemingly passed out, fully dressed, on his back. Stan stands there with a rolling pin in his hand and glares at Time for a minute, then 2. His nostrils start to bleed, both of them, but the left one, of course, starts first. He touches his face above his mouth, and his fingers are red with blood. He stares at Time. He glares at him. He holds the rolling pin in his left hand and wipes blood from the nostrils onto his right hand. Time sleeps soundly. Stan stares steadily. Stan gets some blood on his fingers and smears it onto the rolling pin, then lays it down next to Time on his sleeping bag. Stan spits on Time, then leaves the room. Stan goes back down the stairs and he goes into the room where Chastity is sleeping on the sofa, and he picks up the remote control and he puts it in his pocket. He stands over her and he bends down again. He's almost resting his head in her lap, and he smells her for a minute, 2. And he puts the remote control down and he lifts up her shirt a bit. She begins to snore and he can see her, all of her. And he bends down and he smells her. He reaches down and touches her pubic hair. Then he stands up and leaves the room. In the hallway, he pauses and puts his gloves back on, and he hears nothing. And he closes the door behind him, making sure to lock the handle this time, not as it was earlier. And he walks away from the door, down the sidewalk, down the driveway and then walks down the empty street to his car. He opens the door and slams it, slap, and starts the car and then drives off. And in his dreams, all Time heard was Link's slap, and he slept soundly. He slept soundly. Slap. Even in those dreams, slap.